The night had barely faded when I stepped outside our small house on the gentle slopes overlooking the plains of ancient Anatolia. The air still held the coolness of the late spring dawn, a softness that wrapped itself around my arms and neck like a waking dream. The stars had not entirely given way to the sun, a few lingered stubbornly in the pale sky, shimmering faintly as if reluctant to leave. I always loved this moment, this quiet space between night and day, where the world seemed to breathe in a slower rhythm, inviting thought, memory, and stillness before the tasks of the daylight hours began. Our settlement was not large, but older, my father always said, than even the elders could remember. The houses were built from sun-dried mud brick, arranged in gentle rows that followed the curves of the hills, each dwelling almost touching the next. A narrow path wound its way through the space between them like a soft line drawn with the tip of a finger across the earth. Smoke from early fires drifted upward in thin threads, carrying the scent of barley porridge and the faint sweetness of dried herbs. I pulled my wool shawl around me, more out of habit than need, and began walking toward the communal kilns where I worked most days. My task, like that of many women in our settlement, was to shape and smooth clay vessels used for storing grain, milk, water, and oil. Some believed the work dull, but I cherished its quiet rhythm, the cool touch of clay under my palms, the slow turning of the wheel, the steady shaping of something useful from the earth itself. It was as calming as the breath of dawn. As I walked, my sandals brushing softly against the packed earth, the first rays of sun spread across the horizon. They touched the tops of the hills with a warm, muted gold before descending into the valleys. The wheat fields beyond the settlement responded in a gentle shimmer, each slender stalk bending ever so slightly toward the light. I loved those fields. In the late afternoon, their movement reminded me of a vast, quiet sea. Near the kilns, I found the head potter, an elderly man named Russell, already sitting on a low stool, his hands working a lump of clay with slow, practiced precision. He looked up at me with eyes that always seemed half in this world and half in the memories of many decades lived. "You're early again," he murmured, though without any hint of reproach. His voice held the softened rasp of age, weathered but warm. "The morning is kinder than the afternoon," I replied softly, settling beside him. "And the clay listens better when the day is cool." He chuckled, a small sound that ended quickly, like a ripple fading in still water. "Perhaps it listens better to your hands than mine." I smiled but said nothing more. Words came slowly to me in the morning, and there was no need to fill the silence. It was enough to sit, breathe, and begin shaping the rich brown clay that waited patiently in a woven basket nearby. I lifted a handful, its texture cool and slightly damp, and placed it onto the small turning platform. With gentle pressure, I coaxed it upward, forming the smooth beginnings of a narrow-necked jar. The wheel turned slowly under my feet. The clay responded to each touch with a soft, yielding grace. Time stretched in a quiet line as the jar took shape. Around us, more potters arrived, their footsteps soft against the earth. One by one, they took their places at the wheels or by the kiln fires. Soon, the faint crackling of burning would join the subdued murmur of voices, though no one spoke loudly. There was a kind of reverence in the morning hours, as though raising one's voice might break the fragile serenity of the waking world. By the time the sun had climbed higher, warming the tops of the houses and drawing a soft shimmer from the clay vessels drying on wooden racks, our work area hummed gently with shared labor. The kilns glowed softly, the warmth radiating outward in pleasant waves. I lifted the jar I had shaped earlier and gently set it aside, smoothing its surface one final time before placing it with the others. Assel inspected my work with a thoughtful nod. "Your hands are steady today," he said. "The vessel is even." "It feels even," I answered quietly. I had come to trust the way clay communicated, through the shifting weight between my palms, through the subtle lines of tension and release. It was as natural to me now as breathing. After shaping several more vessels, I took a break and stepped outside the kiln area. The sun had grown brighter, though the air remained fresh. I walked up a small incline toward the edge of the settlement, where a cluster of ancient stones jutted from the earth. No one knew who had placed them there, or why. Some said the stones were remnants of an earlier people who lived before our ancestors came. Others believed they marked a place sacred to the stars, aligned with constellations long forgotten by most. I simply knew that the place felt calm. I sat on one of the smooth stones and let my gaze wander across the valley. The plain stretched out in gentle waves, dotted with distant clusters of wildflowers that painted the earth with subtle swirls of yellow and white. A thin line marked the river, its waters glinting like a soft ribbon of light. Beyond it, low hills rose in muted greens and browns, the quiet guardians of our world. A shepherd moved slowly across the far side of the valley, his flock trailing behind him in a drifting cloud of soft bleats and white wool. The sound was faint, almost indistinguishable from the whispering wind that brushed across the fields. I closed my eyes for a long moment. In the warm light and the steady breeze, it was easy to feel as though time itself had slowed. My breath matched the rhythm of the wind. The simple sounds of the morning, sheep calling, birds chirping from the few trees scattered around, the distant crackle of kilns, wove together in a kind of natural lullaby. When I opened my eyes again, the settlement stirred with busier movement. Children ran between houses, laughing softly. A few women ground grain on flat stones outside their homes. Men hauled woven baskets of barley to storage pits or repaired wooden tools. The day had shifted from peaceful dawn into the steady pulse of daily life. I returned to the kilns and spent several more hours shaping vessels. The work was repetitive, but never tedious. Each jar held its own slight variation, its own quiet personality. By midday, the sun stood high, casting strong light across the earth. The heat encouraged us to pause and share a meal. We gathered in a shaded area where a large willow tree spread its branches like a protective canopy. Cloths were laid on the ground, and food was shared in calm conversation. I sat beside Assel and a few younger potters, savoring the simple meal of bread, goat cheese, olives, and slices of dried apricot. The willow leaves rustled above, casting shifting patterns of shadow across our faces and the food. Someone poured a little watered wine, its coolness refreshing against the heat. The conversation drifted in soft rhythms, comments about the weather, the growth of the barley fields, the newborn lambs in the valley. No one spoke of anything heavy. No arguments, no tension. Midday meals were meant for nourishment of both body and mind, a time to rest in each other's quiet company. After eating, I lingered in the shade, leaning back against the trunk of the tree. The bark was rough against my shoulder, grounding me. Birds flitted among the branches, their wings making soft, rapid sounds like cloth rustling in a slow wind. The warmth of the afternoon light seeped into my skin, easing the stiffness from my arms and back. Eventually, I rose and returned to the kilns for the afternoon's work. The tasks varied, smoothing dried vessels, mixing new batches of clay, tending the fires, or carrying finished jars to storage. The heat of the kilns was strong, but not oppressive. It came in waves, like the breath of the earth itself. The smell of warm clay and burning wood blended into a scent I associated with home, with stability, with the familiar rhythm of my place in the world. As the sun began its slow descent, turning the sky into a gentle gradient of gold and soft rose, we completed the day's final tasks. The vessels were arranged neatly on racks to cool. Tools were cleaned and put away. The fires were allowed to die down gradually, the embers glowing faintly as the heat eased from the day. Walking home through the winding paths of the settlement, I felt the tiredness in my limbs, not an unpleasant exhaustion, but the satisfying weight of work completed. The air had cooled, carrying the scent of evening, wild thyme crushed underfoot, the faint smoke of hearth fires, the moisture rising gently from the river. Inside my home, I lit a small oil lamp. Its flame flickered gently and cast soft patterns across the walls. I removed my shawl, washed my hands and face, and sat on a low stool beside the window. The sky outside had deepened to a warm blue, and the first stars glimmered faintly above the plains. I ate a simple evening meal, barley soup with herbs, a small piece of bread, and a handful of grapes. As I ate, I listened to the quiet of the approaching night. The sounds of the settlement softened, low voices, the distant call of a night bird, the rhythmic chirping of insects beginning their nightly chorus. When the meal was finished, I lay down on my woven sleeping mat. The day felt long, but in a gentle, rounded way, as though each moment had carried me along a calm path toward the restful embrace of night. The air drifted through the window in a slow, soothing current. My eyes grew heavy. I thought briefly of the stars, the ancient ones, the ones that our elders said guided travelers, marked seasons, watched over all who lived on this land long before any of us were born. I imagined them settling into place above the hills, steady and patient. Then, with the lamp burning low, I let sleep carry me softly away. When the first light of dawn filtered into my home again, I woke with the soft sense that the world outside had changed only slightly, as though the night had gently rearranged a few shadows and cooled the air, but left the rest undisturbed. I lay still for a moment, listening to the quiet hum of the settlement waking around me. A rooster called somewhere in the distance, its cry muffled by walls and the soft fabric of early morning. A pair of doves cooed from a nearby rooftop. From one of the neighboring houses, I could make out the faint scrape of grindstones as someone began to crush barley for the day's bread. I sat up slowly, letting sleep fall away like a light shawl sliding from my shoulders. The woven mat under me was warm with the memory of my body. I stretched my arms above my head, feeling the gentle pull of muscles still carrying the echo of yesterday's work. It was not an unpleasant sensation. It reminded me that my days were filled with tangible tasks, that my hands had shaped objects that would move quietly through other people's lives. After washing my face and hands with the cool water in the clay basin near the door, I braided my hair and wrapped my shawl around my shoulders. Outside, the sky was a pale gray blue, the horizon just beginning to blush with the promise of the sun. I stepped into the narrow street, my sandals making almost no sound on the packed earth, and breathed in the crisp air of dawn. Today, I knew, would follow much the same pattern as so many others, the walk to the kilns, the shaping of clay, the steady progress of jars and bowls from formless earth to useful vessels. Yet within that sameness, each day held its own small, quiet differences, subtle shifts in the light, unexpected phrases in conversations, new shapes of clouds on the distant hills. Not much was surprising, and that in itself was a kind of comfort. As I walked, I passed by the house of a woman named Lael, who often worked beside me at the kilns. She was already outside, dusting off a shallow tray used for drying lentils. Her hair was tied back with a strip of faded red cloth. She looked up as I approached and offered a gentle smile. "You're early again," she said softly, echoing words I had heard yesterday from Assel, though her tone was more amused than reproving. "I like to meet the day when it's still quiet," I replied. "The clay feels calmer then." She laughed under her breath, a soft, musical sound. "Then perhaps we should all listen to the clay," she said. "It might know more than we do." We fell into step together, walking the rest of the way to the kilns side by side. The path sloped gently downward, and from this angle, we could see more of the valley spread out before us, its fields still wrapped in early morning shadow. Mist clung to the low ground near the river, like a thin veil not yet drawn aside by the sun. The sight made me think of the way clay looked before it dried, its surface still holding a faint sheen of moisture. At the kilns, Assel was once more seated on his low stool, as though he had never left. The fires had not yet been lit, the area around them was cool and still. He greeted us with a slight nod, his lined face soft with the familiarity of repeated mornings. "The sky is clear today," he murmured, glancing upward. "Good for drying. We'll fire a larger batch before evening." I acknowledged his words with a small tilt of my head and began preparing clay for shaping. Lael joined me, her fingers already coated with a thin layer of the fine earth. We worked without much speech at first. The clay demanded attention, and the silence of the morning felt too gentle to disturb with unnecessary talk. The sun rose slowly as we worked, casting long, pale beams across the kilns and the nearby racks of drying vessels. The light touched the rounded surfaces of pots and jars, picking out their curves and edges, making them glow softly in shades of ochre and dull red. Smoke from a distant hearth rose in a thin column, dispersing into the brightening sky. As the warmth grew, voices around us began to lift in volume. More potters arrived, bringing with them small jokes, comments about aching backs, observations about the fields. Even so, the sound never swelled into chaos. It remained a steady murmur, like water flowing gently over smooth stones. While my hands worked, my thoughts drifted back to the ancient stones on the edge of the settlement, the ones I had visited the day before. They called to me in a quiet way, inviting not dramatic wonder but a slow, patient curiosity. I had often wondered who had first stood among them, what hands had placed them into the earth, and what those people had whispered to the sky at night. Around midday, as the sun climbed high and the air grew warm enough to make the kilns radiate an insistent heat, Assel called for a pause. We carried our tools aside, left the vessels to rest, and gathered once more under the shade of the willow tree. Today, the meal was much the same: bread, herbs, a little cheese, and a handful of dried figs. The familiarity of the food was another kind of comfort, a reminder that life here did not twist sharply but flowed in a gentle, predictable current. As we ate, Lael leaned back on her hands and looked up through the shifting leaves. "Last night," she said in a slow, thoughtful voice, "I woke for a moment and looked at the sky. I saw a bright star moving differently from the others. It seemed to wander, not follow the same path. My husband said it was one of those stars the elders call a traveler. Do you think they truly mark the passing of time?" I chewed a piece of bread thoughtfully before answering. "The elders say the sky is a great bowl turned overhead," I said, recalling the old stories. Most stars stay fixed in their places, but some wander along paths they alone know. Perhaps they tell us of seasons, or perhaps they simply remind us that not everything above us is still. Russell nodded, his eyes half closed. The sky changes slowly, he murmured. Not like a sudden storm, but like the shaping of clay. A little each day, so that we hardly notice until many days have passed. Long ago, I watched the same traveler star you speak of. It returned after a time. It is good to know that some wanderers, at least, still find their way back. His words settled quietly among us. I imagined the sky as he described it, a great dome that had watched over many generations, many settlements, many hands shaping clay and many fields turning from green to gold and back again. The thought was not heavy, it was strangely soothing. We were small, and our days were brief compared to the long patience of the earth and the stars, but we were part of that slow turning. After the meal, some returned to the kilns, while others took a short rest in the shade. I walked once more toward the edge of the settlement, drawn by a gentle desire to see the stones again. The path rose gradually, and as I climbed, the sounds of the kilns and the low conversations faded into the soft whisper of the wind. When I reached the cluster of stones, the sun was high overhead, casting short shadows at their bases. I walked among them, letting my fingers brush lightly over their rough surfaces. Lichen clung to some, pale green and gray, softening their edges. In certain places, the stones seemed to line up in quiet patterns, though I could not say what they meant. I sat down and closed my eyes. The warmth of the stone seeped into me, grounding me. The wind touched my cheeks and tasted faintly of dust and wild thyme. Somewhere nearby, an insect buzzed low to the ground, then moved on. In the stillness, I could almost imagine the lives that had passed here before ours. Women like me, rising at dawn, working with their hands, watching the same hills, breathing the same air. Men guiding flocks or turning soil with simple tools. Children running along paths that might not have changed much in all the time between them and us. Our lives layered over theirs like thin, transparent cloth, each generation leaving a subtle pattern that remained even as new threads were woven in. The thought made my chest ache in a quiet, tender way. Not with sadness exactly, but with a sense of being connected to something very old and very patient, something that did not demand greatness or grand deeds, only a humble participation in the slow unfolding of days. After a while, I rose and returned to the kilns. The afternoon wore on gently, the heat moderating as the sun began its descent. The clay took shape under our hands, the kilns breathed their waves of warmth, and the racks filled gradually with new vessels waiting to dry. As evening approached, the sky softened from bright blue to a delicate wash of peach and gold. Shadows lengthened along the paths. Voices quieted as people finished their tasks and turned toward home. The first fires for cooking evening meals flickered to life, their smoke rising lazily into the cooling air. On my way back to my house, I stopped by the central well to draw water. The stone rim was smooth beneath my fingers, worn by many hands. I lowered the bucket, hearing it splash faintly against the side of the shaft before dipping into the cool depths. The rope creaked softly as I pulled it back up, hand over hand, feeling the familiar resistance of the water's weight. As I turned to leave, I noticed one of the elders sitting nearby on a low stone bench. His name was Idris, and though his back was bent and his hands trembled slightly when he lifted them, his eyes remained clear. He spent many evenings near the well, watching the settlement as it settled into night. "Another day finished," he said quietly as I passed, his voice like dry leaves brushed by the wind. "Yes," I answered, pausing. "The days feel similar, and yet each one leaves a different trace." He smiled faintly. "That is the way of life, child. The river may follow the same path, but it is never the same water that passes. Your hands have shaped different clay today than yesterday. The vessels you made will hold different food, different water. That is enough of a change for one day." His words, simple though they were, rested gently in my mind. I nodded, thanked him, and continued home. After my evening meal and the washing of my hands, I lit the lamp again and sat for a while in its glow. The flame danced softly, casting moving shadows on the walls. I listened to the sounds of the settlement as they diminished, a last call between neighbors, the closing of a wooden door, the faint footsteps of someone hurrying home before full darkness. The sky outside my window deepened into rich blue, then into the velvety black of night. Stars pricked the darkness one by one, some familiar, some faint. I recognized the pattern of a constellation the elders called the Great Plough, its shape marking the turning of seasons. Near it, I thought I glimpsed the wandering star Lael had spoken of, though I could not be sure. I lay down and pulled the cover over myself, feeling the comforting weight of the cloth. The mat beneath me supported my body in the shapes it knew well by now, from many nights of rest after many nearly identical days. My breathing slowed. As sleep approached, I thought of the clay that still waited, of the stones on the hill, of the ancient sky turning in its slow, unfailing rhythm. I imagined that my own thoughts, small and quiet as they were, rose like the faint smoke from our hearths, mingling with the cool air and dispersing into the vastness above. There was no urgency in them, no desperate need for answers. Only a gentle wish that tomorrow would unfold as peacefully as today had, and that my hands would once more find their way naturally to the shape of vessels needed by those around me. With that thought, I allowed myself to slip into the soft darkness of sleep, the sounds of the night and the deep silence beneath them carrying me away like a slow, gentle river. The next morning, I woke again before the full arrival of the sun. The world outside held that same delicate pause between night and day. I rose, washed, wrapped my shawl around my shoulders, and stepped out into the pale light. Yet today, as I began my walk to the kilns, I noticed something slightly different. On the path leading toward the valley, a small group of travelers had arrived, 3 men and 1 woman, along with 2 donkeys laden with bundles wrapped in cloth. Their clothing looked familiar enough, but the cut of their garments and the pattern of their weaving suggested they came from a settlement beyond the hills, perhaps several days' journey away. They moved slowly, their faces tired but calm. One of our own men walked beside them, a shepherd who sometimes ranged far with his flock and returned with news of other places. As I passed, I heard him say, "You may rest here for a time. Our people will share bread and water. The path ahead is long, but the land is kind at this time of year." The travelers nodded with quiet gratitude. Their presence felt like a small stone dropped into the still pool of our routine, sending out subtle ripples. Yet even this change came softly. There was no excitement, no crowd gathering around them, only a steady, gentle welcome. At the kilns, the arrival of strangers provided a thread of conversation that wove itself into the day's work. While my hands shaped another narrow-necked jar, Lael spoke just loudly enough for me to hear. "Do you think they come from the northern hills?" she asked. Their packs looked heavy. Perhaps they carry woven cloth or polished stones to trade. Perhaps, I replied. Or dried fruit from a valley beyond ours. Whatever they bring, I hope their journey has been peaceful. Rustle, nearby, grunted softly in agreement. The land has many paths, he said. Some lead to other settlements, some to empty plains. It is good when those who walk them arrive safely. The rest of the morning unfolded as it usually did, filled with the slow, attentive shaping of clay. Yet, beneath the familiar motions, my mind occasionally wandered to the travelers resting somewhere within the settlement. I imagined them sitting in the shade of a tree, sharing their food with our people, perhaps telling small stories of the lands they had crossed. Not dramatic tales of danger, but simple descriptions, the curves of distant hills, the taste of water from other rivers, the color of earth in other valleys. In this way, the world beyond our own small circle made itself known, not in sudden, overwhelming ways, but as a gentle addition to our understanding of the land under the same patient sky. By midday, when we gathered again under the willow tree, I noticed one of the travelers sitting a short distance away, speaking with Idris. The elder's bent posture contrasted with the stranger's straighter back, but there was ease between them. Their words rose and fell in a slow, even cadence. The soil there, the traveler was saying as I passed within earshot, is a deeper red than here. It stains the hands for longer when one works it. But the wheat grows well. The winters are slightly sharper, the summers a little cooler. Idris nodded, his gaze far away. Earth has many faces, he replied. Yet it feeds us all the same. It is good to know that beyond our hills, it lives and breathes in other colors. I sat nearby, eating my bread and cheese, letting their conversation wash over me like a gentle stream. They spoke of distances in terms of days walked, of landmarks like rivers, lone trees, and outcroppings of stone. They spoke of weather and crops, of herds and paths. Nothing in their exchange was urgent or grand, yet it carried a quiet significance. It reminded me that while my life unfolded within the familiar bounds of our settlement and valley, it was also part of a wider, slowly shifting tapestry. After the meal, I returned to the kilns, and the afternoon passed in its accustomed serenity. The travelers, I learned, would stay only a day or two before moving on, their donkeys rested and their water jars refilled. Their presence, like so many other things, would leave only a soft trace, a few remembered words, a slight widening of our mental map of the world. As evening came once more, I followed the familiar path back to my house, the sky above deepening into its nightly blues and purples. The first stars emerged like old friends returning to their quiet watch. I lit my lamp, ate my simple meal, and lay down on my mat. Before closing my eyes, I thought again of the ancient stones at the edge of the settlement, of the countless hands that had worked this land, of the stars that had watched over travelers and potters alike for more seasons than anyone could count. The rhythm of days like mine, repeated again and again across generations, felt like a slowly hummed song, one that did not demand attention, but offered comfort to any who paused to listen. In that thought, soft and steady, I allowed sleep to arrive once more, like a gentle hand resting on my brow, leading me into a night as calm and patient as the land itself. The morning after the travelers arrived, I woke with the same slow sense of quiet that usually greeted me at dawn, but something in the air felt subtly different. The settlement held its usual stillness, the soft brushing of dawn across the earth, the faint murmurs of roosters waking, the steady breathing of homes that had not yet stirred to full life. Yet beneath that familiar calm, there was an undercurrent, a feeling like the faint shift of wind just before a new season begins. Not troubling, not urgent, only a quiet sign that something had entered our world and would leave a trace, however gentle. I rose, washed, and stepped into the cool morning air. The sky held the faintest blush of gold, still delicate and half-formed. Dew clung to the grasses along the path, each droplet catching the early light like tiny beads of clear glass. I walked slowly, savoring the coolness before the sun claimed it for itself. As I made my way toward the kilns, I glanced toward the central square where the travelers had rested. They were already awake, sitting together and sharing a simple meal with one of our shepherds. Their donkeys grazed quietly near the edge of the path, tails flicking lazily at unseen insects. The traveler's presence no longer felt like a disruption. Instead, it fit into the morning in the same soft way a new star might appear in the night, unexpected but not unwelcome. The air around the kilns was still cool when I arrived. Lael was already there, arranging partially dried vessels on a wooden plank. Her movements were slower this morning, as though her mind wandered elsewhere. When she noticed me, she offered a small smile. "Did you sleep well?" she asked gently. "Well enough," I replied. "And you?" She hesitated for a moment, then shrugged lightly. "I dreamed," she said. "Though I'm not sure of what. A wide plain, perhaps. Or maybe it was only the echo of hearing the travelers speak yesterday. Dreams can be like clay, soft and easily shaped by whatever touches them." Her words carried a truth I had often felt but rarely spoken aloud. Dreams and clay both responded to the impressions left upon them, though the marks of dreams tended to fade with the morning light. We began our work without further conversation. The clay in the baskets was cool beneath my hands, smooth and pliant. I lifted a portion, pressed it into shape, and began to coax it upward into the form of another vessel. The wheel turned steadily under my foot. My fingers guided the clay with a patient rhythm, the kind that invited one's thoughts to drift gently while the hands continued their steady labor. Russell arrived soon after, carrying a bundle of wood for the kilns. He placed it beside the fire pit and sat on his usual stool, surveying the morning activity with quiet satisfaction. "The weather will hold steady today," he murmured, mostly to himself. "Good for firing." We worked in comfortable silence while the sun climbed higher. Light filtered softly through the thin clouds, casting a diffused glow over the kilns and the racks of drying vessels. The warmth grew slowly, giving the clay time to adjust without cracking. Around mid-morning, as I shaped the curve of a wide bowl, the shepherd who had guided the travelers approached the kilns. His steps were unhurried, his expression thoughtful. "The travelers will depart soon," he said softly to Russell. "They are preparing their donkeys. They leave us with thanks." Russell nodded. "May the path be kind to them." The shepherd turned to me and Lael as well. "They asked if some of us might walk with them to the head of the valley," he said. "Only a short way. They wish to learn the easiest direction for crossing the ridge." I exchanged a glance with Lael. She seemed undecided for a moment, then shook her head softly. "The kilns need tending today," she said. "And there is much to shape." I felt a similar pull toward staying. Our days had rhythms that provided both purpose and rest, and breaking that rhythm sometimes unsettled the calmness I carried inside. So I merely nodded and returned my focus to the clay. The shepherd walked on, heading toward others who might accompany the travelers for a time. Not long after, I looked up and saw the travelers passing near the edge of the kilns. They moved with that quiet determination of people who had walked many days and would walk many more. As they passed, one of them, the woman, tilted her head in a small gesture of farewell. Our eyes met briefly, and she offered a soft smile. "May your days be gentle," she said. "And yours," I replied with equal softness. Then they continued along the path, their figures growing smaller as they approached the curve of the valley. A few of our shepherds walked with them, pointing occasionally toward distant hills. The last I saw of them was the faint glimmer of their packs catching the sun before they disappeared behind a low rise. Their departure left behind a sense of stillness, not emptiness, but a kind of quiet settling, like dust floating gently to the earth after a breeze. For the rest of the morning, we shaped clay vessels, tended the fires, and arranged drying jars. The work demanded enough attention to keep the hands engaged, but not so much that the mind could not drift. My thoughts wandered to the travelers now and then, where their path would lead, what other settlements they would see, what small stories they might carry with them from our quiet place. By midday, the sun had warmed the kilns enough that the air wavered slightly above them, visible like faint threads of heat. We gathered once more beneath the willow tree for our meal. Ansel brought a small jar of honey, a rare treat, which he poured sparingly over slices of flatbread. The sweetness of it lingered pleasantly on the tongue. Idris, the elder, joined us today, leaning heavily on his walking stick as he settled onto a low stone near the tree. "The travelers have gone," he remarked in his quiet, thoughtful voice. I watched them leave. They walked steadily, as people do when they carry not just goods, but stories. Lael tilted her head curiously. "Stories?" "Yes," Idris said, folding his wrinkled hands together. "Stories of the land they came from. Stories of the path ahead. Stories of the sky they slept under last night, and the sky they will sleep under tonight. When travelers walk the earth, they walk through many shells of time. They see how the world stays the same and how it changes. Those who stay in one place see the depth of the land. Those who travel see its breadth. Both are needed." His words sank quietly into the midday shade. The only sound for a moment was the soft rustle of willow leaves dancing with the breeze. After the meal, the others returned to the kilns. But something in me tugged gently toward the ancient stones again. Their presence had lingered in my thoughts since the morning began. I excused myself with a small nod and walked toward the rise overlooking the valley. The path curved upward gently, lined with low wild grasses that brushed softly against my ankles. The sun warmed the crown of my head, but a breeze flowed steadily across the ridge, cooling my skin. When I reached the stones, I sat once again on the largest one, letting the warmth seep into my legs. From this vantage point, the valley spread out before me like an open book, its pages written in patterns of grass, fields, and distant hills. The river shimmered in the sunlight, a narrow ribbon of silver winding through the land. The settlement behind me felt small and comforting, tucked into the curves of the terrain like a resting animal. I traced a line across the stone's surface with my fingertips. Its texture was familiar now, rough in places, smoother in others, worn by countless seasons of wind and rain. The lichen on it had deepened in color since the last time I had come here, or perhaps I only noticed it more now that I saw it often. As I sat there, I let my thoughts drift, not in sharp directions but in soft, looping paths. I wondered what this hill had looked like before any of our homes were built. Before the kilns were set in place. Before the shepherds walked the valley with their flocks. Perhaps only grasses and wildflowers covered the land then. Perhaps the stones themselves were set down by hands belonging to people with different ways of shaping clay, different stories about the stars. The breeze brushed lightly through my hair. In the distance, a hawk circled slowly, its wings held in wide stillness as it rode invisible currents of rising air. Time slowed around me. The world felt very large and very gentle, as if it were settling more deeply into its own long rhythm. Eventually, I rose and returned to the kilns to help with the afternoon tasks. The air was warm, but not as oppressive as in high summer. The vessels dried well. Lael and I exchanged a few quiet comments about the thickness of the clay, the angle of a jar's rim, the way a bowl's curve caught the light. Assel oversaw the firing of a large batch of vessels. He tended the flames with care, adjusting the wood piece by piece to maintain a steady heat. The crackling of the fire blended with the faint hum of voices and the occasional call of a bird passing overhead. The afternoon passed gently, and before long, the sun dipped low toward the horizon. The sky blushed with soft pinks and muted oranges. Shadows stretched across the ground. We completed the final tasks, placing the cooled vessels on racks and stacking wood for the next day. My walk home was peaceful. The settlement was bathed in warm hues, the mud brick houses glowing softly in the fading light. Children played their last games of the day. Women gathered laundry from lines. Men returned with baskets of gathered herbs or tools repaired during the afternoon. At the well, one of the travelers' empty cups sat on the stone rim, forgotten. I picked it up, turning it in my hands. It was simple in design, slightly different in style from our own vessels. I placed it gently on a nearby ledge where someone would find it later. Inside my home, I lit the lamp, washed, and prepared my evening meal. The flame flickered softly against the wall, casting shadows that swayed like slow dancers. Outside, the night deepened, bringing with it the cool freshness that always accompanied late spring. I lay down on my mat, feeling my body sink into the familiar contours. My eyes grew heavy almost immediately, lulled by the steady cadence of the day and the soft quiet of the evening around me. Before slipping fully into sleep, I thought once more of the ancient stones and the distant hills, of the stories Idris spoke of the travelers moving through the world under the slow watch of stars. I imagined their footsteps fading into the vastness beyond the ridge, while ours continued here in gentle cycles. Then sleep came, smooth and undisturbed, like a soft blanket drawn over the land itself. The days that followed the travelers' departure returned to their familiar rhythm, though each moment seemed touched by a subtle sense of expansion, as though the world had grown slightly larger in my mind. The memory of their footsteps, their soft voices, and the calm strength with which they crossed the ridge lingered gently, like the fading echo of a distant song. It was not an intrusive memory, nor one that demanded attention. It simply accompanied me quietly, drifting through my thoughts as I shaped clay or walked along the winding paths of the settlement. One morning, as I stepped outside my home, I felt the air holding the first hint of early summer. It was still cool, but the promise of warmth was unmistakable. The sky stretched in a pale, unbroken sweep of blue, and the birds seemed livelier, their calls echoing in brighter tones as they flitted between rooftops and small patches of trees. I made my way to the kilns, passing familiar faces who greeted me with small nods or murmured words. A young girl ran past, her laughter trailing behind her like a ribbon, and disappeared around the corner where her mother stood grinding grain. The scent of baking bread drifted faintly through the air, blending with the earthy smell of damp soil and the sharper tang of wild herbs crushed underfoot. At the kilns, Lael and Assel were already at work. Lael shaped a tall vessel with long, graceful strokes of her hands, while Assel prepared a batch of clay, kneading it slowly, his expression one of focused contentment. When they noticed me, they greeted me with the quiet warmth that had come to define our mornings together. "You slept well, I hope," Lael said softly, smoothing the rim of her vessel. "Well enough," I replied with a gentle smile. "The night was calm." Assel nodded. "The calm will last a while," he said. "The winds have settled, and the land feels steady. It will be a good season for the kilns." I took my place beside them and began shaping clay of my own. The clay yielded beneath my hands, soft but resilient, ready to be guided into new forms. The wheel turned beneath my foot, its steady rotation mirroring the slow cadence of my thoughts. I pressed my palms lightly against the clay, coaxing it upward into the beginnings of a wide-mouthed bowl. The edge curved under my fingers, smooth and cool. As I shaped it, I found myself humming a quiet melody that my mother used to sing in the evenings, a tune without words, more a pattern of rising and falling breaths. The morning progressed without hurry. The sun warmed the ground gradually. The kilns radiated their familiar comforting heat as fires were lit and tended. The air filled with a soft mix of sounds, the murmur of voices, the crackle of flames, the occasional rustle of wind threading its way through the drying racks. By midday, the willow tree cast a wide canopy of dappled shade. We gathered there, sharing our simple meal of bread, cheese, olives, and dried fruit. The conversation flowed in gentle currents. Lael spoke of her daughter's dream of collecting colored stones from the riverbank. Assel mentioned the possibility of repairing one of the older kilns soon, before the heat of full summer arrived. I listened, offering small comments, feeling the comfort of their presence settle around me like the shade itself. While we ate, Idris approached us, leaning carefully on his walking stick. He lowered himself onto a low stone with a soft sigh, and we shifted slightly to make room for him. "The days grow lighter," he murmured, lifting his face to the warm breeze. "I can feel the change in my bones." Lael smiled. "The land is settling into summer." "Yes," Idris said. "And with the change comes memory. I was thinking this morning of a story my grandmother used to tell. About this valley before our people came. We turned our attention to him, comfortable and expectant. Idris rarely offered stories without purpose, yet his tales were never meant to teach through sharpness or warning. They were shared like gentle reminders of the long threads connecting past and present. "She said," Idris continued, "that long before our houses stood here, before our kilns burned their first fires, before even the ancient stones on the ridge were placed, the valley was home to a small group of wanderers. They lived simply, moving with the seasons, following the herds across the land. They knew every star by name," she said, "and believed that the land itself whispered to them as they walked." Assel raised an eyebrow faintly. "Do you think it's true?" Idris shrugged lightly. "True in the way stories are true. Perhaps not in every detail. But the land holds layers of memory. Each generation leaves its trace. We walk on paths shaped by those who came before. When the travelers left the other day, I thought of those old wanderers. Perhaps the land remembers them." His words settled into a comfortable silence. The breeze rustled the willow leaves above us, the sound soft and soothing. After the meal, we returned to our work, though the sun now carried a stronger warmth. The clay dried more quickly, and the air shimmered softly above the kilns. I shaped vessels with steady hands, occasionally pausing to stretch or wipe my brow. By late afternoon, as the shadows lengthened, I went once more to the stones on the ridge. The draw toward them had grown familiar, a gentle call rather than a sharp one, like a memory asking to be revisited. I walked slowly, the breeze brushing lightly against my skin, the path beneath my feet warm from the sun. When I reached the stones, the valley unfolded before me in its usual calm glory. The river reflected the sky's changing colors, blue deepening into shades of lavender and rose. Birds flew low over the grasslands, settling for the night. The shepherds were bringing their flocks toward the settlement, their silhouettes softened by distance. I sat on the largest stone and let my gaze wander. The stillness here was unlike the stillness of early morning. It felt full, as though the land had breathed deeply throughout the day and now exhaled in a slow, contented sigh. My thoughts drifted to the travelers once more, but not with longing or curiosity, simply with the calm acknowledgement that their path continued beyond ours. I wondered where they were now, whether they had reached the next settlement, whether they had found a place to rest under the steady glow of the stars. The same stars that now began to appear above me. One by one, they emerged in the darkening sky. The familiar patterns took shape, each point of light joining its neighbors in ancient formations. The wandering star Lael had spoken of glimmered faintly near the horizon, its slow movement almost imperceptible yet undeniably different from the others. The air cooled as the evening deepened. I stayed on the stone a while longer, letting the peace of the ridge settle into me. When I finally rose to return to the settlement, the first true breath of night had already spread across the land. The houses glowed softly with lamplight as I walked down the path. Voices drifted gently through open doorways. The scent of evening meals filled the air, stewed lentils, roasted roots, herbs steeped in warm water. At the well, I stopped to wash my hands and face. The water was cool and clear, and its touch refreshed me. Idris sat nearby once again, watching the settlement as it prepared for night. "Are you well?" he asked, his voice soft. "I am," I replied. The ridge was peaceful. "It always has been," he said. "And I believe it always will be. Some places carry their calm through the ages." I smiled and thanked him before continuing home. Inside my dwelling, I lit the lamp and prepared my evening meal. The flame flickered softly, its light casting slow, dancing shadows across the walls. I ate in quiet, savoring the stillness, the gentle rhythm of my own breath. Later, as I lay on my mat, I listened to the night sounds, the distant call of an owl, the soft chirping of insects, the faint murmur of someone finishing their tasks. The sky visible through my window was bright with stars, scattered across the darkness like grains of white sand. The day settled into memory, each moment softening as sleep approached. My thoughts drifted like slow-moving clouds, moving without urgency, without weight. I thought again of Idris's story, of the first wanderers who moved through this valley, of the ancient stones whose purpose remained unknown but whose presence felt undeniably steady. I imagined those early people watching these same stars, feeling the same breeze, shaping their lives in rhythms not so different from ours. The connection felt comforting, like a gentle hand resting over mine. I let my eyes close, my body easing into the familiar embrace of the mat. The lamp burned low, its flame shrinking into a small golden shape before extinguishing itself. The night wrapped around the settlement, around the valley, around the stones on the ridge. And in that vast quiet, I drifted into sleep, soft, unhurried, as timeless as the slow dust of the land beneath me.